Chris Lee and Blake Lovell from Southeastern14.com here to talk Auburn, Kentucky Saturday. That's the biggest game played on the Plains in forever. Blake, Auburn a 3-point favorite according to Ken Palm. Don't have the actual lines out as we do this on Thursday around lunchtime. Boy, just a massive game for both teams. Kentucky coming off a road win at A&M. And Auburn coming off a home blowout of Georgia as expected. Can't wait for this one, Blake. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the biggest game of the year and the SEC for sure. And I know it'll be one of the biggest games in college basketball this season, without question. Yeah, I mean, it's just, as we talked about, it's two teams that are exactly where they want to be in mid-January or whatever. It's just kind of, this is what you expect going into the season. You expect to have two teams like this that are playing at their best. And we thought this season the SEC was going to be as strong as it's been in a long time. And maybe that's to be up for debate, I think, in terms of maybe some of the teams that are struggling in the bottom half. But in the top half, I mean, these are very good teams, and these two are at the top. And yeah, it just sets up as a matchup. I think this is one that you can look at all the statistics you want. We'll break it down, but at the end of the day, I think this is more about just two teams that have the talent to, go a very long way in the NCAA tournament, and it just matches up very well, I think, for each of them in terms of just how they go into this game, riding a lot of confidence and a lot of momentum, and that's going to make for what I think will be a pretty special atmosphere and probably a pretty special game. So.
What do you see as the keys to how this one turns out?
Well, I mean, I think, again, we look at what stood out for both teams. It's pretty clear. It's the front court play. I think, with Oscar Tshiebwe for Kentucky and for Auburn, it's Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler. And when you combine that together, what do you get? And I think that's going to be the big question here is, what do you get from each side? I mean, we talked about it recently. Oscar Tshiebwe hasn't had his best game statistically in recent games, but he hasn't had to. This is a game where statistically I think he'll have to have a pretty big game for Kentucky to be able to win this one. But at the same time, on the other side, Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, it's just, I mean, you got 6'10", 7-foot guys. It's just, I mean, it's just really hard, I think, to be able to put a consistent attack against Auburn, knowing that you have these two guys doing what they're able to do. And I think that's going to make it a challenge. And, certainly when you look at just those three players, I think those three players are going to define kind of how this game plays out. But as for like the X factors, I think it's everyone else, right? Like it's the guys that aren't those three, and, Ty Washington and Wendell Green and Katie Johnson and Kellen Grady. Like it's the guards, it's the perimeter play that's really going to, I think, play a big role here in terms of how those guys in particular sort of match up against each other.
It's funny, you're going through X factors and you're listing a lot of players, and they're really good players, in the backcourt for both teams. We'll get into that in just a minute, but I think you could argue that the best three players in the league, certainly the best two probably, are Oscar Tshiebwe, and then pick one. Jabari Smith is where I'd go next. You could argue Kessler's maybe the third best player in the league. I don't know that I would, but he's probably top 5 or 6 at least. Point is, that's two big guys for Auburn, one for Kentucky, and I'm wondering if that makes Jacob Toppin, who's really popped at times, a really big X factor in this one.
Well, and these are the two teams that have the most depth, I think,
Yeah.
of anyone in the SEC. And so I think that's where you can probably take your pick on who's going to be the guys that we're talking about the most, maybe outside of those top three guys in particular. There's just so many different options, whether that is, some of these guys just stepping up on each side. And hey, right, like maybe it's Alan Flanigan, who, I mean, we've talked about this Auburn team, and he's kind of starting to get back, I think, to where he wants to be in terms of playing and all that. But maybe he's the guy we're talking about, saying, hey, he's back now officially, based on how he plays in this game. Or maybe it is, someone like a Davion Mintz, who is so experienced that, maybe he doesn't get as rattled as much as a couple of these other players, right? Like maybe you have some of those other guys for Kentucky that get, put themselves in a position, like we said, where it's going to be an atmosphere that they have not seen this season. It's one of those things that I think there's just so many different dynamics at play here with all of these guys, and I think that's the most exciting part is to see, who are we talking about the most coming out of this game, and the chances are it's going to be one of those three that we mentioned. But there are so many other guys that are going to impact who wins this game, and that's where you can go eight deep for each team and point out all the different options that you have. And so I think that again just makes this such a matchup that has so many different intriguing elements to it.
Well, the backcourt is very interesting too. We'll get to wings in a bit, but if you're going to consider Kellen Grady a wing, which I kind of do, but you mentioned Flanagan. He played 24 minutes in a blowout, which I think was a great sign. Maybe that was Bruce Pearl just wanting to see what he could do. But you got Xavier Wheeler, who's been back for Kentucky for about a week now. So presumably both backcourts are healing up. You've got Ty Washington, who's just been tremendous when Wheeler missed some time and since. And then for Auburn, you've got Wendell Green, who's been really good since he transferred from Eastern Kentucky. Hard to really know who's got the edge when you look at the matchup there because both teams are just flush with good guards. I mean, we talked about Grady. You've got K.D. Johnson for Auburn, who's a spark plug. I just think all over the court it's going to be interesting to see how these guys face off.
Yeah, it's everywhere. I mean, it's every single position I think that you're going to look at and wonder how it plays out. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, you know, Kentucky, from an offensive rebounding standpoint, we know what Sheboy can do, and I think that's where, for a Kentucky team that, quite frankly, has been probably, they've gotten to that point we thought they could get to shooting wise. Now, I know they started early on; they maybe didn't shoot the ball as well at times, but they're starting to make shots, and I think because of that, this is where you do go on the road, and maybe your shots aren't falling from outside or whatever, but when you have a guy like that on the inside, you can get those second chance opportunities, and those are going to be important, I think, for Auburn to limit that. But again, I mean, that's where Auburn can sport out, 6-10 and 7-1, and feel like that they can, sort of take advantage of that and be able to limit those second chance opportunities. So there are, I mean, it's just like this is a fun game. Like there's just no other way to put it. Like I know that, whoever loses, it's not going to be very happy about it. But like if you just both fan bases going in, like you have to be thrilled just about how this game sets up for both teams. And nationally televised game, great atmosphere, and then you've got all these different points, whether it's offensive rebounding for Kentucky, whether it's Auburn being able to really force turnovers on this Kentucky team. I think that's something else that there have been times where we've seen that where maybe Kentucky not as efficient handling the ball as they would like to be, and I think that's something else to where, as we said, when you get going and Auburn gets going in that gym, they can really turn it on, and that's where you can have a game that goes from a 2-point game to a 12-point game in a span of a minute. And I think that's the danger you run into with Auburn is I think they have, more of that next gear. I know we saw Kentucky put it into next gear against Tennessee, but I think Auburn in this setting here, they have probably more of that next gear that they can put it into than maybe Kentucky does. And so I think that's another interesting aspect.
Yeah, and a lot of that's K.D. Johnson. I mean, that guy just gets down the floor so quickly. But that brings me to another X factor in this game, and you just don't know going in. And a lot of it may depend on who the crew is. But foul trouble is one thing that can always derail a team, especially on the road. You look at the bigs, and Walker Kessler's a little more foul prone than is Oscar Sheboy. Jabari Smith doesn't draw a lot of fouls. I think 2.8 per 40 minutes, which for big is really good. And then you look, K.D. Johnson gets 4.2 per 40 minutes, so he may be the most foul-prone player on the floor who's going to play a lot of minutes. But then again, it's at Auburn, so maybe that gets neutralized. Are we just trying to find a needle in a haystack here? Or does foul trouble, do you see something in this matchup that suggests, that it could tilt one way for a team depending on how it's called?
Well, I say this in the nicest way possible, but I want to try to think back to the Auburn and Kentucky game we had. I wish I could find it right here on the fly, and I may be able to, but I want to say couple years ago, there was one of these games that these two played on national television, a CBS spot, that turned into a free throw shooting contest. I really hope that doesn't happen. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and I'm going to try to find it here talking about it because it's one of those games I think that just really stood out for me when I looked back and was like, oh my goodness. But there have been many examples of this, right, where you get some of these games that turn into free throw shooting contests, and I feel like this, could potentially be one of those games perhaps, and you kind of see how it plays out maybe with all of that, but I don't know. I mean, I do think this is one that because of the magnitude of the game, obviously we would not be surprised if this is a very sort of tightly contested sort of matchup, I think, between these two. And I just think that's kind of the nature of the game. So yeah, I do think there's something to it, and that's where those big three we talked about, Kessler, Smith, and Sheboy. If one of those guys gets in foul trouble,
It's
it
probably
immediately
Kessler. Yeah.
well, and it immediately changes the game, right? It just completely the dynamic changes at that point. There's just a lot of things that are different about a game like that. So I think that that's probably one of the things that goes into it as well is to kind of know that if you get somebody in foul trouble, it's just one of those things where the game's going to change completely just depending on who's on the floor in those kind of matchups. So
Well, here's what's interesting, and I would not have expected this given the way the teams are constructed. Kentucky is 301st in free throws to field goal attempts, which just doesn't make any sense given the way their offense is and that it's so point guard dominated, and that they've got a big, who's just a handful. And same with Auburn, right? Same story. Great guards, great bigs. Auburn is 222nd in free throws to field goal attempts nationally. So that suggests it's not going to be a factor. If it is a factor, Auburn shoots 73%, Kentucky shoots 72%. So, I mean, again,
yeah.
it depends on who's fouled, but history this year doesn't suggest it's a huge factor, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see. You never know in these kind of games. Shots get tight, on the outside, and maybe it does become a more physical game in the paint, and you just have a lot of guys who can attack, and got a lot of athletic players who can attack off the dribble and make their own plays. So yeah, it's up to the officials to see, I guess, how it's gonna play out. I did look back here. This game's from January 2019. I don't know if this is a game I was thinking of, but this is probably one of that you could point out of several instances in the SEC, but I don't know if this is the one exactly. But Kentucky won at Auburn 82-80. There were, let's see, 53 free throw shot. There were 45 fouls called between the two teams. That may have been the one I was thinking of, but there may be another one too. Well, you say that, like I was looking, I was like, you know what, 53 is actually kind of low for some of the SEC games I've seen before. So I don't know if that was the one I was thinking of, but yeah, hopefully that's not the case here, and hopefully it's a more sort of free-flowing game between these two.
Any other loose ends on this game that we didn't get to?
I think that whoever wins will have a really nice claim to potentially be the best team in the country going into next week. And I know that, if you're Gonzaga and Baylor and those kind of teams, you're probably going to look up and say, well, hold on a second. But I really think that you see the way these two teams are playing. I can't imagine there are even a handful of teams in the country playing better than these two right now. And really just, the potential moving forward. I think it's if Auburn wins, I think they're going to. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. They'll be number one if they win this game. Kentucky, I'm not sure, but if Auburn does, they'll be the number one team in the country next week. So for all the debate and the discussion about, should they have been this week or not, that will all be put to rest next week if they win this game.
Okay, Blake. Ken Palm's got this -3, and we don't see a line on it yet. Gut feeling on that, and of course, we've got a partnership with our friends at Action 24/7 that'll let you tell people about, where if you do have an inclination to put some money on this, you can get a nice bonus. So give us your gut feeling and tell people where they can go.
Yep, I'm picking Auburn here. I don't think that's much of a surprise. I think the atmosphere, everything is going to come into play. And yeah, I mean, we saw Kentucky kind of struggle a bit as we talked about at A&M, and Kentucky just hasn't played as well on the road. We keep talking about this. Away from home, they have not played as well. And I think that's just, some of those teams are going to be like that in college basketball. And this is the biggest game Auburn has had there in what? Name another game
Yeah.
of this sort of magnitude, right? I can't name one. Because it is, your number one ranking on the line. Like there's all sorts of stuff. I think Auburn's the best team in the SEC. I just think Auburn, matches up very well, like we said, with this team. And, that is a scenario where, let's say Oscar Tshiebwe gets in foul trouble early, completely changes the dynamic of the game.
Yeah.
And, I think that's where Auburn can really take advantage. So I'm going to pick Auburn here. Like you said, who knows? Score wise, I think it's. Am I going to predict Auburn's going to win this game by double digits? No, because I think Kentucky's just too, they have a lot of good players. And I would be surprised if this turns into an Auburn blowout. But I said what I said earlier for a reason, in that Auburn is the type of team that can change the game so quickly on a dime. And, I still think it's one where if Kentucky gets off to a slow start here and you've got all those factors in play, I can't say I'd be surprised if Auburn really comes out and plays really well here. So Auburn does not strike me as the kind of team that's going to come out tight in this kind of scenario. I just don't. We haven't seen that a lot with Bruce Pearl's teams over the years. I feel like they've pretty much, they rise to the occasion in these scenarios. But that's why I'm going to go with them. But this should be a great game. I think it will. Certainly you'll see a lot of good things on both sides from these two. But I'm going to take Auburn here. And like you said, Action 24/7. If you look in the description of this video, we've got our link there in our promo code South14. If you click on that, sign up your first deposit. They will match up to $800 on that. So you can sign up, make your picks. If you don't agree with me, you can pick Kentucky. If you do agree with me, you can pick Auburn. And there you go. So just use that code South14 and click on that link we have in the description of this video.
Well, you've had a pretty good track record so far. Haven't kept stats, but
Listen, I'll be honest with you. I think I've actually done a lot better probably at this point than I have in recent years. I've been doing this since, gosh, I started picking games just for fun. Like, I think it was 2016, I want to say. So what, this is 6 years now, and I just did it for fun back then, but that was when it was so hard, right? Like, even now it's really hard, but you think about like the changing nature of the league. It's just, you don't know what you're going to get on a night in, night out basis. It's kind of that way now, but things are starting to kind of, you realize more trends, right? Like there are just more trends that stand out. So we're doing okay so far, but this is a big game, so we'll see how it plays out.
Okay, thanks for watching. If you are watching, please hit the subscribe button. That helps us out a bunch. We'll be back with another video where we'll preview the rest of the SEC action.